Welcome to the Alien Dusk, where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. The bridgeways of Varus 7 shimmered in a radiant orange hue, snaking through the bustling cityscape beneath a dark crimson sky. The illuminated paths twisted in erratic patterns, creating a mesmerizing visual that made Arden Cade's head spin. Speeding gliders zoomed past, their trails stirring the thick, metallic air, which carried the faint scent of electro-fabricated citrus. A relentless barrage of electronic tones, mechanical hums, and various alien dialects filled the air. "This is unreal," Arden muttered, squinting at his malfunctioning transit chip. The display flickered erratically, showcasing rows of cryptic symbols in a dozen languages, none of which made any sense. "I was supposed to be on a beach by now," he grumbled. He tugged anxiously at his oversized jacket, a souvenir from his trip to Varus 7, which read "Exploring Beyond Earth" in bold, glittering letters, almost as if it could shield him from the overwhelming assault of sights and sounds at the spaceport. What had begun as a quick weekend away from Earth had spiraled into a chaotic, galactic mess. A creature with translucent skin and 20 wriggling arms brushed against him, leaving a trail of iridescent slime that clung to his sleeve. Arden grimaced, quickly using a sterile wipe to clean it off. "Excuse me," he called, trying to flag down a passing figure in a sleek uniform that seemed to scream, "Official." "Could you point me to the transport office? I need—" But the figure floated past him without even a glance, absorbed in a rapid-fire conversation with a holographic device projecting from their wrist. Above, a massive display flashed through advertisements for high-tech gadgets. Liquid energy that could shift between solid and gas states, implants designed to give you memories of worlds you'd never been to, and what looked suspiciously like a policy for accidental organ duplication. "Focus, Arden. You just need to find the desk, ask for a flight back to Earth, and be out of here before anyone notices you." Ahead, he saw what could have been a pedestrian crossing. The foot traffic, hovercrafts, and automated carts all converged in this central hub. He pushed through the crowd, eyes scanning desperately for any sign, any symbol that might point to information, help, or even just a bathroom. The crossing signal showed a countdown, strange geometric patterns glowing in bright orange. Arden hesitated. What did it mean? The patterns shifted, switching to a deep purple. Was that good? Should he move? "Don't," a voice warned, cool and clear, emanating from a figure beside him. Startled, Arden turned to find a woman standing just a few feet away, her posture relaxed yet commanding. Her eyes gleamed with a sharp, pale blue light, and her skin was a deep emerald green, the vibrant color almost glowing in the dim light. She appeared humanoid, but with a precision to her features, as if sculpted rather than born. She wore a translucent garment that rippled between solid and fluid, clinging to her form in a way that defied gravity and sense. "Don't cross," she said again, her voice rich with an accent he couldn't quite place. "That lane leads to a quantum rift. One wrong step and you'd get atomized. Without a stabilizer, you'd be nothing more than a pile of particles." As if to prove her point, a small automated vehicle entered the lane, flickered briefly, and vanished in a shimmer of light, only to reappear safely on the other side. Arden blinked, swallowing nervously. "Right, thanks for the warning." Before he could finish, a massive transport vehicle came barreling toward the intersection, engines roaring. The green-skinned woman's eyes widened, and in a swift motion, she seized Arden's wrist and yanked him sharply to the side, pulling him into a narrower pedestrian path. "This way," she instructed, her grip firm and steady. Her touch was electric, sending an unfamiliar warmth through his arm, a strange, tingling sensation that he couldn't quite place. As they crossed into a safer zone, a soft tone sounded overhead, and a floating drone zipped by, flashing a bright violet light as it snapped their picture. "What was that?" Arden asked, still reeling from the near miss, and the fact that the most striking alien he'd ever seen was still holding his arm. Her lips curled slightly, as though she found his confusion amusing. "Congratulations, Earthling. You're now officially part of a genetic alignment agreement." Arden blinked, staring at her. "What? Wait, here on Varus?" "Assistance during the crossing is considered formal consent to a genetic partnership," she explained coolly, releasing his wrist. She extended her hand in a manner that seemed intentionally awkward, an approximation of an Earth greeting. I'm Lyra, by the way, Department of Biological Advancement, Sector 6. Arden stared at her hand, unsure whether to shake it or run for his life. This is some kind of joke, right? Like an initiation prank for Earth visitors? Lyra's face remained impassive, though a flicker of impatience passed through her luminescent violet eyes. The crossing protocol is not a joke. The moment I intervened, our biological signatures were recorded. She gestured to a hovering drone that had already moved on to capture images of passing crowds. The system identified us as compatible with a 73% alignment, adequate, but not ideal. Arden ran his fingers through his hair, a nervous habit from childhood. So just to be clear, because you saved me from getting vaporized, we're now supposed to, what, have a kid together? Not exactly, Lyra clarified with clinical precision. All that is required is your genetic contribution. The law does not mandate continuous involvement, though it is recommended for optimal offspring development. This is insane, Arden's voice rose, causing nearby pedestrians, some of whom had tentacles or multiple limbs, to glance at him with what looked like bewilderment, or perhaps disapproval. Some made gestures that resembled what he could only interpret as the alien equivalent of rolling their eyes. I'm a software engineer from Earth, he protested, his hands gesturing wildly. I didn't come here to get married or start a family with some random alien. Lyra's posture stiffened, a hint of annoyance flickering across her face. I'm not thrilled by this either, Earthling, but the laws are absolute. If I don't receive your genetic material before the next lunar phase, I'll be deported to the frozen colonies. The what? Arden's mind scrambled to make sense of her words. A place for what exactly? Lyra's voice dropped, her expression turning grim. Exiled individuals, the unfulfilled. No one returns from there with their career intact, or their sanity. She studied him for a moment, her gaze intense. Do you understand the stakes? Arden's mind raced. Can't we just explain this? File a form, pay a fine? Surely there's some legal loophole or appeal process? Lyra shook her head. Appeals take time we don't have. How long are you staying on Vera 7? Arden froze for a moment, processing her words. I was supposed to leave days ago. My flight got redirected. I need to reach the Earth Embassy. He fumbled for his communicator, a standard-issue device that should work across interstellar systems. He activated the emergency consular service, his fingers trembling slightly. A holographic interface popped up, showing a featureless AI assistant with the generic, pleasant demeanor of all Earth consular services. How may I assist you, citizen? The AI asked in a tone that oozed artificial politeness. I need help, Arden blurted. I'm stuck here on Vera 7, and I somehow accidentally agreed to have a child with someone I just met. The AI's expression didn't waver. Accessing legal database. One moment. Ah, yes. You voluntarily entered into a genetic symbiosis agreement under Section 37B of the Veris 7 Protocol. Earth acknowledges the reproductive customs of allied Class II planets. Congratulations. You are now recognized as a co-progenitor. Arden's heart sank. But I didn't agree to this. I didn't know anything about it. Ignorance of local law is not an exemption, the AI responded, its tone never changing. Would you like me to update your Earth identification to reflect your new parental status? Congratulations, Father. Furious, Arden slammed his finger on the disconnect button. Turning to Lyra, he shot her an incredulous look. She stood there impassive, her expression either sympathy or professional curiosity. He couldn't tell which. 48 hours, she said, her voice calm but firm. We have 48 hours to explore options. I'll show you around Vera 7. Perhaps we can find a way to reverse this. Arden looked around at the bizarre landscape, the glowing suspension bridges defying Earth physics, towering structures that seemed alive, breathing with the energy of their inhabitants, and the ever-moving crowd of beings so different from anything he had known. And if we don't find a loophole, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's eyes flashed with the light of the city's neon glow. Then I'll get what I need, and you'll return home with an unforgettable story. Either way, it's a win for the system. Arden felt his mind spinning. Do you actually want a child? The question slipped out before he could stop it, and he instantly regretted it. But Lyra's reaction was not what he expected. Her composure faltered for just a second. What I want is irrelevant. The system requires reproduction for the betterment of society. She hesitated, then added quieter. But yes, I'd prefer to choose my genetic partner rather than have one assigned to me by the Bureau of Life Partnerships. Arden felt like he was sinking deeper into a surreal nightmare. One moment, he was stuck in his apartment on Earth, dodging calls from his ex and overdue taxes. The next, he was negotiating genetic contracts with a glowing green alien in a city where the laws of physics barely applied. If I try to leave, the Synchronization Enforcement Bureau will track your biosignature before you even get to the spaceport, Lyra continued as though discussing the weather. And your reproductive obligations will be collected under less consensual circumstances. A chill ran through Arden's spine. 48 hours, he agreed reluctantly. But I'm not promising anything beyond trying to get out of this mess. Lyra's lips twitched into something almost like a smile. Understood. She gestured toward a floating platform nearby. My apartment is in the bioengineering sector. It's not far. Let's go. Lyra's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. We can discuss strategy at my place. As Arden followed her toward the hover platform, trying his best to avoid staring at the way her translucent attire shifted with each movement, a thought hit him like a punch to the gut. Wait, you planned that? You pulled me out of danger on purpose, didn't you? You targeted me. Lyra glanced over her shoulder, her violet eyes catching the light in an unsettling way. Don't flatter yourself, Earthling. If I were searching for genetic partners, I would have picked someone more suitable. She appraised him quickly. Taller, perhaps. Despite the surreal situation, Arden felt a grin tugging at his lips. I'm average height on Earth, you know. How quaint, she replied, stepping onto the platform, which hummed to life beneath her feet. Coming, or would you prefer to navigate Varus 7's chaotic transit systems alone? Arden stepped cautiously onto the platform beside her, maintaining what he hoped was an appropriately respectful distance. The city before him looked like something out of a dream or a nightmare, a maze of impossible structures, bending gravity, and convoluted bureaucratic snares that he couldn't even begin to understand. 48 hours to escape a reproductive contract. It was going to be a very long weekend. The hover platform began its descent, cutting through layers of Varus 7's mind-bending architecture, each level more bizarre than the last. Arden gripped the safety rail, trying to steady himself as buildings seemed to fold and refold in on themselves, making way for passing traffic. His stomach churned when they passed through a solid-looking structure that turned out to be nothing more than an interactive hologram advertising some sort of molecular cuisine. First time experiencing phase shift transit? Lyra asked, a glint of amusement flickering in her violet eyes as she noted his discomfort. Arden swallowed hard. Is it that obvious? Your knuckles are turning white, and you've been holding your breath for the last minute, Lyra observed, unfazed. She gestured toward the city, where the glow of neon lights cast eerie shadows on the streets below. Relax. No one's died in transit for at least 3 lunar cycles. Well, that's reassuring, Arden muttered under his breath. The platform finally touched down on a landing pad jutting out from a twisting tower, its surface pulsing with bioluminescent veins. As the doors parted, they revealed a marketplace teeming with activity. Lyra gestured grandly as they stepped inside. Welcome to the Sensory Exchange. If you want to understand Varus 7, this is where you start. Arden was immediately assaulted by a barrage of smells, sounds, and sensations he couldn't even begin to categorize. Vendors shouted in languages his translator implant struggled to make sense of. Concepts that were far beyond anything Earth had to offer. One stall displayed what appeared to be bottled colors that moved like liquid smoke. Another featured crystalline formations that seemed to emit emotions. Arden accidentally brushed against one of the crystals and was struck by a wave of nostalgic sorrow for a place he had never been. Are those smells for sale? He asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Emotional signatures, Lyra clarified. That vendor specializes in intimate experiences. The amber one, for example, is the satisfaction of solving a quantum paradox after weeks of sleepless nights. Popular among our researchers. And the purple one, Lyra's skin flushed a shade darker, almost imperceptibly. That would be the sensation of a deeply satisfying union between genetically compatible individuals. Arden blinked, heat rushing to his own face. Right, he mumbled. Without waiting for a response, Lyra steered him toward a nearby food court. The smells here were even more bizarre, with dishes floating through the air and seemingly alive, transforming as the chefs hummed in unison. One particular chef with 4 arms manipulated the ingredients, which changed color and shape depending on the tune. Arden watched, entranced, as one dish leapt into a customer's mouth on its own. Maybe something a bit less animated? Arden suggested weakly, still trying to wrap his mind around everything. Lyra smirked and pulled 2 cups of luminescent blue liquid from a stall. I promise, this one's harmless. Arden hesitated, then sipped. The taste was a perfect blend of mango and mint, with an aftertaste that fizzled on his tongue like a mild electric shock. So, about this contract, Arden began again, but Lyra interrupted him with a sharp, almost cold tone. Not here, she said curtly. There are emotional synchronization officers everywhere. Let's continue with our cultural exploration before we discuss anything private. She led him deeper into the market, passing booths where vendors showcased everything from cybernetic enhancements to toys that existed in multiple realities simultaneously, to living garments that adapted to the wearer's emotions and body temperature. What's happening over there? Arden asked, pointing to a large circular arena where a crowd had gathered. Lyra's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. Quasi-banana racing. Perfect timing. It's the semifinals today. Before Arden could ask what that meant, Lyra had already pulled him into the spectator section. In the center of the arena, competitors were riding what appeared to be giant, writhing yellow fruits with tentacles. The fruits extended tendrils that wrapped around their riders in a symbiotic embrace. Arden stared, utterly fascinated, as the race began. The quasi-bananas slithered, bounced, and occasionally launched themselves through obstacle courses, while the riders clung to them for dear life. Are those things alive? Arden asked, still trying to comprehend what he was seeing. Partially sentient bioengineered transport, Lyra explained, her tone almost clinical. The bond between rider and quasi-banana is telepathic. The creatures respond to emotional commands, not physical ones. Arden watched in amazement as one competitor's mount suddenly split into 3 smaller versions of itself, each taking a different route before recombining at a checkpoint. That's Zor Kath, 3-time champion, Lyra pointed out, her voice full of admiration. He's mastered the quantum splitting technique. And that's legal? Arden asked, his eyes wide. Not just legal, it's encouraged, Lyra replied. Innovation drives evolution here. As the race continued, Arden became acutely aware of Lyra's closeness. The subtle fragrance of ozone and exotic flowers seemed to cling to her, and every time she leaned toward the arena in excitement, her shoulder brushed his, sending that familiar electric tingle racing up his arm. We should go, she said abruptly after the race ended. Our appointment at the Genetic Recognition Center is in 20 minutes. Arden's stomach dropped. Our? Standard procedure for new genetic agreements. They'll scan our compatibility and assign necessary assessments. Arden lowered his voice, trying to mask his panic. You're making it sound like we're applying for a mortgage or something. Lyra's face turned serious, her expression giving nothing away. This isn't a choice, Earthling. It's the law. On Trix, reproduction isn't left to chance or passion, Riley said briskly, her pace quickening as she led him down the hall. It's too important. Besides, these are just preliminary scans. The invasive tests come later. Invasive, Nick echoed, his voice tinged with disbelief. She didn't sound very convincing. The Genetic Recognition Center felt like a hybrid of a high-tech medical facility and a bureaucratic nightmare. The walls, gleaming white, pulsed with data streams. Double helixes, compatibility charts, and graphs Nick couldn't interpret. Officials, their tentacular appendages replacing human fingers, processed the incoming couples with mechanical precision. Designation? Asked a functionary, its nameplate reading Cavor, Junior Genetic Assessor. 3 of its tentacles hovered over a biointerface, ready for action. New crossing contract, Riley stated matter-of-factly, filed yesterday at intersection T559. Cavor's 7 eyes blinked in sequence. Species variance noted. Earthling and Trixian. Interesting combination. 3 tentacles began typing, while 2 others retrieved samples from them. Vials required. Before Nick could protest, a needleless extractor hovered near his arm, drawing blood with surgical precision. Another device snaked into his hair, plucking a strand effortlessly. Please exhale into the receptor, Cavor instructed, presenting what looked like a crystalline balloon. Is all this really necessary? Nick asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Cavor's expression remained impassive. Genetic mapping must be thorough to predict offspring viability. The tentacles flew over the interface, processing the data at an unnerving speed. Results processing. Please proceed to waiting area C for compatibility assessment scheduling. The waiting area was a sterile, minimalist room with uncomfortable seating clearly designed for alien anatomies, not Earthlings. Nick shifted uncomfortably before finally voicing his frustration. This is insane, he muttered to Riley. I don't care what your laws say. People can't just be forced into parenthood for helping someone cross the street. Riley's calm exterior faltered slightly. You think I enjoy this? Her voice lowered, careful to keep it between them. Being processed like breeding stock? She glanced around to ensure no one overheard. This system wasn't designed for people like me. What do you mean? Nick asked, his curiosity piqued. Before she could respond, a door slid open, and their number was called. Directed to Assessment Room 12, a holographic interface flickered to life upon their entry. Preliminary results indicate 78.3% genetic compatibility, an automated voice declared, higher than the standard cross-species average. Physical and psychological compatibility testing required. A complex schedule materialized between them, each block packed with terms like emotional resonance, evaluation, and reproductive scenario simulation. The list was overwhelming. This will take weeks, Nick said in disbelief. Expedited processing, available for imminent departures, the system chirped back. Compressed schedule, 3 mandatory evaluations within 48 hours. Do you accept? Riley didn't hesitate. Her hand hovered over the acceptance prompt, sealing their fate before Nick could object. What are these evaluations exactly? Nick demanded as they exited the center. Standard bureaucratic hoops, Riley replied dismissively. Nothing to worry about. Nick grabbed her arm, stopping her in her tracks. No more evasions. You want my genetic contribution? Then I deserve honesty. They locked eyes, an unspoken challenge between them. Around them, the bustling genetic center continued with its sterile, mechanical efficiency. Finally, Riley's shoulders slumped, the faintest hint of exhaustion creeping in. My lab, she said softly. We can talk there. Riley's lab occupied the top floor of a spiraling tower in the bioengineering district, a sharp contrast to the sterile coldness of the genetic center. Here, controlled chaos reigned. Living specimens pulsed in containment fields, equations floated as holographic models, and half-assembled devices cluttered workbenches. You built all this? Nick asked, genuine awe in his voice, despite his lingering frustration. A spark of pride flickered in Riley's eyes. I'm developing symbiotic survival suits, biotech that adapts to any environment. She gestured to a prototype suspended in a field, its membrane pulsing. That one can withstand the vacuum of space while maintaining optimal body temperature and oxygen synthesis. Nick studied the setups with growing respect. The technical complexity here rivaled anything Earth had produced, perhaps surpassed it. You're not just an engineer, he said thoughtfully. You're an artist. Riley's gaze softened at his words, though her features remained mostly composed. She picked up a living gauntlet from her workbench, slipping it over her hand. The material molded seamlessly to her green skin, enhancing her natural bioluminescence. The system considers this frivolous experimentation, she said bitterly, the smile fading. Valuable only if it has military applications or enhances reproductive efficiency. And that's why you need a child to keep doing your research? Nick asked, the pieces starting to fall into place. Riley's luminous eyes met his. Do you think I'm thrilled about this situation? Her voice, though controlled, was tinged with frustration. The system demands procreation for social advancement. Without offspring, I lose my lab, my work, everything I've built. She removed the gauntlet, placing it carefully back in its containment field. If I don't comply, they'll send me to the sand colonies, where unfulfilled women meditate on their genetic responsibilities until they select a government-approved donor. That's barbaric, Nick said quietly, the words heavy with empathy. That's Trix tradition, Riley replied, her back turned as she focused on an instrument panel. Nick frowned. I get it now. You were planning to use a clone eventually, but genetic diversity is preferred. When you saw me, an Earthling, with a completely novel genetic pattern, you saw an opportunity. Riley's shoulders tensed. Yes, I wasn't lying about the danger you were in, but I recognized a chance to maintain my independence, to keep my research alive. Nick's frustration dissolved, replaced by a strange understanding. So you need my biological sample to secure your scientific freedom, and then I can go home? That's the technical requirement, Riley confirmed, turning to face him. But first, we need to complete the compatibility assessments. Well, let's just say they're personal. She recited the list of tests. First, the emotional proximity scan. Second, the physical attraction verification. And lastly, a genetic exchange simulation. Nick blinked, processing the information. So basically, a date, a makeout session, and a compatibility test? Riley nodded, though her skin darkened slightly, though not requiring actual completion. An awkward silence settled between them. After a moment, Nick muttered, I need a drink. Riley retrieved a crystal decanter from a nearby shelf, pouring a golden liquid into 2 glasses. This is a synthesized neurostimulant, she explained, handing him one, similar to your Earth alcohol, but without the cellular damage. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, sending that now familiar electric tingle between them. Neither acknowledged it. Nick took a long sip, feeling the warmth of the liquid settle in his stomach, his thoughts clearing. You mentioned we could hack the system? A glint of mischief flickered in Riley's eyes. I have access to certain testing parameters. If we can manipulate our biometric responses during the scans, we might be able to fake the results. Nick's mind, trained for these kinds of situations, immediately began to work through the possibilities. Just enough to pass the system's tests without actually having to go through with it. Exactly, Riley said, stepping closer. But we need to practice maintaining consistent biometric patterns. Heart rate, pheromone release, pupil dilation. The emotional proximity scan measures all of those unconscious responses. How do we practice that? Nick asked, his heart rate inexplicably picking up, despite his best efforts to remain calm. Riley took another step closer, now only inches away. We need to acclimate to each other's presence, she said softly. Become familiar with our physical responses. Nick swallowed hard. Is this practice? Or is this the actual test? Riley's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. Consider it a preliminary assessment. Emotional synchronicity patrol, one of the officers bubbled, its surface rippling with authoritative patterns. Contract evasion detected. I'm not evading anything, Nick lied, trying to sound casual. Just sightseeing. The second officer extruded a sensory appendage, hovering near Nick's chest, detecting rising anxiety markers. Intention to flee confirmed. The officer produced a floating document, its holographic text flashing in front of him. Report to mandatory biological compatibility assessment immediately, or face penalty elevation. Before Nick could protest, the officers began guiding him toward a facility that resembled a high-end medical clinic, though its sleekness felt more invasive than soothing. Riley was already waiting when he arrived, her expression a mixture of disappointment and resignation. Running was foolish, she murmured as the officers departed. The entire planet has empathic surveillance. Nick opened his mouth to argue, but a technician stepped forward, holding 2 transparent bodysuits. Compatibility suits, the technician said, her voice flat. Please disrobe and apply these. They measure physical attraction markers during your assessment. Nick gawked at the barely there material. You expect us to wear these? They're practically see-through. Riley muttered under her breath. That's the point. Physical attraction can't be faked when visual stimuli are present. They were directed to separate changing areas, and Nick reluctantly stripped and slipped into the bodysuit. It clung to him like a second skin, disturbingly transparent, though strategically opaque in certain areas. Looking down, he couldn't help but feel awkward as indicator lights on the suit began to glow. When he emerged, Riley was already waiting. Her bodysuit shimmered on her green skin, turning her into a walking, glowing sculpture. Nick immediately felt his body react. His suit lit up like a Christmas tree. Biomarkers engaged, a robotic voice announced, beginning compatibility assessment. What followed was a series of increasingly uncomfortable exercises, where they were brought closer and closer. The suits measured their physical responses, and every proximity test made Nick's heart race a little faster. By the time they were instructed to maintain skin contact for a full 3 minutes, Nick had all but given up on controlling his reactions. The indicator lights blazed, his body a constant source of data. Assessment complete, the system finally announced. Physical compatibility, 92.8%. Significantly above the threshold. Proceed to reproductive simulation chamber at the next appointed time. Back in their normal clothes, Nick sighed in relief. Thank God. He couldn't even look at Riley. That was scientifically invalid, Riley said briskly. Physical responses can be influenced by environmental factors. Nick couldn't help himself. Is that your professional assessment? Riley's composed demeanor faltered slightly. My professional assessment is that we need to hack the final test. Otherwise, you'll be a father before you leave Trix. They retreated to her laboratory, and while Riley accessed restricted genetic databases, Nick found himself watching her work. The intensity of her focus, the grace with which she moved, it was captivating. I think I found something, she said after a few hours of searching, pulling up a document. An ancient bylaw in the contract code. There's a ceremonial renunciation procedure, a public declaration of refusal. Hope surged in Nick's chest. That's perfect. When can we do it? Tomorrow. The Hall of Ceremonies has an opening. Her voice held an edge of reluctance. What's wrong? This solves everything. Riley turned fully toward him, a shadow flickering in her eyes. Nothing's wrong. You'll be free to leave. And She paused, a long breath escaping her. I'll find another solution. The words hit Nick like a physical blow. If he renounced the contract, Riley would still face deportation to the sand colonies. There has to be another way, he said, insistent. Why do you care? Riley shot back. You were dragged into this. I essentially kidnapped your genetic sample. You should be thrilled to escape. Maybe I am, Nick replied, his tone softer now. Or maybe spending the last few days with you has made me realize there are worse things than being tied to someone who's brilliant, determined, and doesn't just follow the rules everyone else does. Silence stretched between them before Riley spoke again. The ceremony requires a witness, she said, her voice guarded. The Hall of Ceremonies tomorrow, at lunar zenith. The Hall of Ceremonies towered over the central district of Trix 9, a living structure that defied earthly physics. Its exterior seemed to shift with the environment, its impossible angles folding into one another like a work of art. Inside, the air hummed with a strange energy, as if the walls themselves were aware of the ceremonial weight the space held. Nick tugged at the formal attire Riley had provided, a suit that adjusted to his body temperature and reflected his inner turmoil in soft blues and grays. Ready? Riley asked, standing next to him in a ceremonial robe that seemed to radiate off her in waves of shimmering color. She looked nervous, her usual confidence wavering for the first time since they'd met. As ready as I'll ever be to publicly reject an alien reproductive contract, Nick muttered, his nerves bristling. The entrance membrane parted as they approached, recognizing their genetic signatures. Inside, the space was vast, endless even. Floating platforms moved people around, while the centerpiece was a circular platform, the renunciation dais, surrounded by witnessing orbs that would record and broadcast the ceremony for posterity. "The contract renunciation is a serious matter," intoned a multi-limbed official. "It nullifies all binding agreements and—" The official glanced at Nick, assessing his Earthling genetics. "The Earthling wishes to renounce?" "Yes," Nick said, his voice steady, but his eyes avoided Riley's. "I understand." The platform beneath his feet glowed, signaling the start of the ritual. Riley stepped to the opposite side, her expression unreadable. The witnessing orbs flared to life, projecting their images throughout the chamber. A few scattered onlookers paused to watch. Cross-species renunciations were rare, a form of entertainment for some. "Speak the words of unbinding," the official prompted, the formal phrase displayed in glowing text before Nick. "And your obligation ends." Nick cleared his throat, the words of the script now feeling hollow in his mouth. He looked up at Riley, her carefully crafted demeanor slipping. In her eyes, he saw not the brilliant engineer who had used him for his genetics, but someone facing the fallout of a lifetime of rules. She wasn't looking at him like a biological tool. There was respect in her gaze now, maybe even trust. The words caught in his throat. He didn't need the script. He paused, then met Riley's eyes fully. "I choose you." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. The official froze, its multi-limbed appendages flailing in confusion. The witnessing orbs pulsed a deep magenta, registering shock, both from the audience and the bureaucratic system itself. "That is not the renunciation phrase," the official stammered. "No," Nick said, his voice firm. "It's the truth." Riley's skin glowed brighter, her bioluminescence flaring in response to the surge of emotion. "You understand what you're doing?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crowd. "Probably not," Nick admitted with a grin. "But I'm doing it anyway." The official scrambled, its tentacles fumbling over the regulations. "This is unprecedented. The ceremony must be reclassified as a voluntary affirmation. Different protocols apply. Different fees." Nick barely heard the bureaucratic panic as he stepped forward, crossing the space between them. He took Riley's hands, her skin sending a familiar spark up his arm. "Let's get out of here," he whispered. Back in her laboratory, the bioluminescence of her experiments shimmered under the night cycle, casting the space in an ethereal light. The plants in her lab seemed to reach out as they entered, sensing the heightened emotional energy between them. "You didn't have to do that," Riley said softly, breaking the silence that had fallen over them since they'd left the Hall of Ceremonies. "We could have found another solution." "Could we?" Nick took a step closer, his fingers brushing against her skin. "Because it feels to me like we've been fighting this from the moment you pulled me across that intersection." Riley's eyes narrowed, but there was something new there now, something softer. "Fighting what exactly?" Nick closed the distance between them, his hand rising to gently trace the glowing patterns on her skin. "Whatever this is," he murmured, "it's bigger than a contract." Time seemed to stop as she met his gaze, and in that moment, they both understood. No contracts, no rules, just the pulse of the universe connecting them. The kiss came next, soft but certain, and the world outside faded away. Nick's heart raced as the weight of the moment bore down on him. The chamber was a cacophony of murmurs and clicks as every being in the room, whether organic, synthetic, or otherwise, processed his audacity. His declaration hung in the air, a defiant challenge to a centuries-old system built on unyielding logic and process. "I propose," Nick began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins, "that Riley Tamar, Nicholas Wellington, and I be allowed to choose our own future, free of genetic manipulation, free of artificial bureaucratic constraints. Under the first law of crossing, we can make that choice together." Riley's eyes flickered with a spark of hope, though the containment field kept her at a distance. Her gaze moved from Nick to the towering adjudicator, then back to him. Was this truly happening? The chief adjudicator's form shimmered as it processed the weight of Nick's argument. "You invoke the first law of crossing, which grants the right of self-determination to any who cross a barrier not their own. Yet the Earthling is bound by no contract here. Only the Trixian, Nick took a step forward, uncowed by the hovering regulations. My choice is simple. If I have crossed the threshold of my own will, if I have connected with her in ways that no legal document can define, then my path should be mine to choose. There was a tense silence. Inspector Traw's tentacles writhed in agitation, the only sign of his growing frustration. This is an abuse of legal precedent, he spat, his voice vibrating with mechanical disdain. This connection you speak of? It's irrelevant. It is everything, Nick shot back, his voice rising with the intensity of his words. You don't get to define what I feel, what Riley feels. You can't measure the value of someone's life by the data you collect from a scan, or the lines in a contract you drew up centuries ago. The room was still. A collective breath seemed to hang in the air as the adjudicator processed Nick's declaration. The quiet was unnerving, the weight of the decision becoming palpable. After a long pause, the chief adjudicator finally spoke, its voice slow and deliberate. The first law was designed to transcend cultural and biological distinctions. It allows the crossing of boundaries of worlds, species, and hearts. If you choose this path, Earthling, you will face consequences, but so too will the one who binds herself to you. She will have her choice taken from her. Is this the future you desire? Nick didn't hesitate. His resolve, hard as iron, was unwavering. I choose her. I choose us. The room erupted into quiet murmurs, the law upheld in its raw, ancient form. The adjudicator turned to face Riley, its robes swishing as it processed her response. Riley stood frozen, her eyes wide, as if she were only just beginning to comprehend what Nick had done. The containment field around her flickered for a moment, destabilizing in response to the first law's invocation. For a moment, she wasn't sure whether to feel terrified or relieved. The universe she had been fighting to control, her meticulous world of logic and structure, was now being rewritten by a human who had nothing but raw emotion, pure defiance, and a love that defied everything. The adjudicator addressed her. Riley Tamar Nicholas Wellington, you now stand at the crossroads of your life. Should you choose this path, the contract will be nullified, but you will bear the weight of your actions. There is no going back. Will you accept the choice of crossing, or will you remain within the parameters set before you? Riley's breath caught in her throat as she looked at Nick, standing there so resolute, so determined. For a moment she saw the truth of it all, not the manipulations, the contracts, the data, but the human connection that had unfolded between them. It wasn't just about genetics or laws. It was about something far deeper, something that transcended all of that. I choose him, she whispered, the words so quiet that only Nick could hear them. But in that moment, it felt like the universe itself had paused, waiting for the choice. The adjudicator nodded, a shimmering, glowing aura surrounding it as the chamber's hum turned to a soft, resonant tone. Then, as prescribed by the first law, your choices have been accepted. The contract is nullified, and the trial is dismissed. The official's voice faded into the background as Nick and Riley met each other's gaze, no longer separated by laws or barriers, but bound by something far more powerful: choice. Outside the central justice nexus, the entire city seemed to hold its breath, as if the outcome of this unprecedented trial might affect more than just the two of them. The streets of Trix 9 pulsed with energy, reflecting the shifting tides of the universe. Beings of all shapes and sizes paused in their daily routines, drawn into the rare spectacle of a case that defied the boundaries of their world. Nick stood at the edge of the platform, his heart still racing from the legal drama, his hand holding Riley's tightly in his own. The sky above was a swirl of violet and gold, and the stars seemed to shine brighter than they ever had before. In that moment, nothing mattered beyond them, beyond the bond they had forged through choice. "Are you sure this is the right choice?" Riley asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper. Nick looked down at her, his heart full. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." And with that, the two of them stepped forward, together, into an uncertain but undeniable future. Whatever the universe had in store for them next, they would face it as one. Nick stood at the entrance to the labyrinth, feeling the pulse of its walls reverberate through his chest. The air smelled strangely sweet, almost intoxicating, and the soft glow of bioluminescent fungi bathed the shifting maze in eerie light. He glanced over at Riley, who was watching from the viewing platform above, her face a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Ready for the next round?" he asked with a forced grin, trying to mask his nerves. She didn't smile. "Nick, this isn't just about winning anymore. The labyrinth tests your very being, your ability to adapt to Trixian physiology. And if you fail, you won't just lose." "I know," Nick interrupted gently, his expression hardening, "but I'm not walking away from this. Not without you." Riley's gaze softened for a moment, and for a second she almost reached out to him. But then she pulled back, shaking her head as if trying to dismiss the unspoken emotions flooding between them. "Stay focused, Nick. This trial is no joke." Nick nodded and turned his attention to the shifting walls of the maze. The labyrinth seemed to breathe, the very ground beneath his feet alive with strange vibrations. The walls were made of pulsing organic matter, and he could feel the hum of the space amplifying in his bones. The maze felt sentient, responsive to every movement, every emotion. A deep voice echoed through the air, vibrating with the weight of ancient authority. "The trial of body begins. Fear and doubt shall shape the labyrinth. Overcome them, or be consumed." Nick stepped forward, taking a deep breath. As he moved, the air shifted, and the walls seemed to contract and expand around him. The path ahead was already closing, forming new barriers as quickly as he could move. He could feel the pulse of the maze responding to his hesitation, each step drawing the walls in closer as though it fed on his uncertainty. He forced himself to breathe, focusing on the feeling in his chest. The maze wasn't just testing his ability to physically navigate it, it was testing his mind, his spirit, his trust in himself. The more uncertain he became, the more the labyrinth constricted around him. Nick's mind raced. "Focus. You've been through worse. Tax audits, galactic bureaucracy, a failed relationship with no chance to choose." He reached down, his fingers brushing against the surface of the shifting walls. They felt alive, warm, slightly slick, and responsive. His breath hitched slightly as the wall before him writhed, sensing his hesitation. A path opened up to his left, but he could hear the faintest whisper of a voice, the voice of doubt, creeping into his mind. "What if you're not enough? What if this is all too much?" The doubt spiraled into his chest, threatening to turn into panic. But then he thought of Riley, the warmth of her hand in his, the weight of her trust in him. He couldn't let her down. He looked forward, and with a deep exhale, he began to move again, stepping forward with more certainty. The walls around him shifted, but this time, they seemed to give way, responding to his conviction. But the maze wasn't done yet. As he moved deeper, the air thickened with the psychoactive spores that floated lazily through the space. They seemed to swirl around him, latching onto his skin, sending strange, fragmented images flashing across his mind. It was like a dream, disorienting and surreal, but with an undercurrent of reality that kept pulling him back. He saw Riley's face, but distorted, her features blurry and unfamiliar. A voice whispered, "She's gone. This is where you lose her." Nick shook his head, trying to clear the fog from his mind. He stumbled for a moment, his vision flickering, and he could feel the maze closing in around him again. Panic threatened to take hold, but then he heard a familiar voice inside his head, calm and steady. "Focus. You are enough. You've already chosen." It was Riley's voice, even though she wasn't physically there. The connection they shared, the bond they had formed, was the key. He wasn't alone in this maze. Her strength was with him, and in that moment, he drew upon it. With renewed determination, Nick pushed forward, his senses sharpening, his mind clearing. The maze reacted, its organic walls pushing outward, almost as if surprised by his strength. The labyrinth wasn't testing his body, it was testing his belief in himself, his ability to trust in the choices he had made. As he approached the center of the maze, the walls parted and the path cleared. He stepped into an open space, the air thick with triumph and the scent of something sweet, something almost celebratory. The maze had accepted him, its trials completed. The adjudicator's voice resonated, confirming his success. The trial of body is complete. The challenger has passed. Nick stood, panting slightly but victorious, his heart pounding with the rush of adrenaline. He had made it through the second trial, but there was still one more to go, the trial of soul. As he stepped out of the labyrinth, Riley was there, waiting for him, her eyes wide with disbelief and relief. She rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she cupped his face. You did it, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I never thought you'd... Nick smiled at her, the exhaustion and fear melting away as he held her close. I'll do anything to win this for us, Riley. But just as the words left his lips, the final trial loomed before them, the trial of soul. They both knew what it meant. No more games, no more strategies. It would be a battle of the heart, raw and exposed before the entire galaxy. The adjudicator's voice cut through the silence. The trial of soul begins now. Both challengers must face the deepest recesses of their emotions and reveal them fully to all. No secrets. No lies. Nick's stomach tightened. This was the true test. But as he looked at Riley, he knew. They had already crossed so many lines together, broken so many rules. This trial wouldn't just be about him. This was their story, and it was one they would face together. The weight of the moment settled around them. He took her hand, feeling the electric pulse that had never left them, and nodded. Let's do this, he said. And so they stepped into the final trial, together. Nick approached the entrance of the labyrinth with a mixture of apprehension and determination. He glanced back at Riley, her steady presence anchoring him in the storm of uncertainty swirling around him. Any tips? He called, his voice steady but carrying an edge of anxiety. Remember our fencing, she called back, her voice a calm counterpoint to the chaotic energy around them. Emotional attunement guides the blade. Nick's mind flashed back to their intense but enlightening fencing practice. The bio-blades hadn't responded to pure physical motion, but to the underlying emotions, a connection they both shared. And now this labyrinth, a living, breathing maze, would demand the same. Nick steeled himself and stepped forward. The walls of the labyrinth immediately began to shift, dark tendrils lashing toward him. Panic surged within him, a primal fear that triggered the labyrinth to react violently. Thorns sprouted from the ever-changing walls. Focus, he whispered to himself, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Attune. He closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. The sensation he recalled from his connection with Riley, that subtle but electric current of shared energy, began to settle over him. He remembered the quiet unity they'd shared in her lab, the way their energies had perfectly aligned. It was the same here. He opened his eyes. The walls seemed to calm, pulling back just slightly as if listening. Instead of fighting against the labyrinth's organic movements, Nick let himself synchronize with it, moving not with force but with acceptance. The walls, sensing his calm, seemed to become more cooperative. When a passage blocked his way, instead of charging forward, Nick adjusted his emotions, projecting confidence and serenity where fear would normally surge. The labyrinth responded in kind, clearing the path ahead. When he reached the heart of the maze, the final challenge awaited, a shimmering wall of living biological energy, a barrier that demanded nothing less than complete surrender. For a moment, Nick hesitated, uncertainty flickering in his chest. But Riley's words echoed in his mind, and he stepped forward, allowing the energy to wash over him. It scanned him, his genetic makeup, his thoughts, his emotional state. He didn't resist. He let it happen. The barrier pulsed, and then, to Nick's surprise, it parted, letting him through unscathed. Trial of body complete, the adjudicator's voice echoed with a tone of unexpected respect. The challenger has passed. Nick allowed himself a brief moment of relief, but there was no time to dwell. The final trial loomed ahead, the trial of soul. A transparent platform materialized before him, hovering above the central plaza of Trix 9. Below, a sea of alien faces watched with bated breath. Nick could feel the weight of their collective attention pressing down on him. Neural transmitters hovered around the platform, ready to amplify and broadcast his every emotional pulse to the entire city. The trial of soul requires absolute truth, the adjudicator's voice intoned solemnly. Any attempt to deceive will be immediately detected. Nick took a steadying breath as the neural interfaces connected to him, his temples, wrists, and chest. The sensation was overwhelming, but he forced himself to focus. Every alien mind within Trix 9 would soon know what he felt, what he truly thought. There would be no hiding now. "Speak," the adjudicator commanded. Nick looked out at the crowd, his gaze drawn to Riley, standing at the edge of the sea of observers. Her azure eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, the rest of the galaxy seemed to fade away. "I never believed in fate or destiny," he began, his voice loud and clear, amplified across the entire city. "Back on Earth, I ran from everything that mattered. Commitment, responsibility, even love. I avoided connections like the plague." The neural transmitters pulsed in time with each admission, confirming his sincerity for everyone to feel. "I came to Trix 9 by accident," he continued, his voice steadying. "I met Riley by chance. Or maybe it wasn't chance at all. In 48 hours, this woman showed me more about what it means to truly connect with someone than I learned in 32 years back home." The crowd began to murmur. Their curiosity peaked as light patterns, complex and beautiful, manifested in the air around him. His emotions, raw and unfiltered, painted an image for all to see. "Your laws and traditions, they're foreign to me, strange even, but I understand her. I understand what it means to find someone who makes you better, who sees you for who you are, and still chooses to stay." Nick's gaze shifted to Inspector Tra. "Your system exists to control and regulate connection. But true connection, that's something beyond your rules. It's in the space between your regulations, in the places you can't control." He turned back to Riley, the light in his chest growing. "I don't want to be your duty, your obligation. I want to be your choice. If you choose me, I'll stay." "And yes," he added with a grin, "kids don't seem so terrifying anymore." The light from the transmitters intensified, a flash of brilliance that cascaded through the city's network. The energy in the air was undeniable, the absolute truth of his feelings radiating across every corner of Trix 9. The biometric monitors, pulsing and flashing, confirmed his authenticity. 100% emotional truth, a result never before seen in the history of the trials. A tense silence gripped the plaza. Even Inspector Tra, normally impervious to emotion, stilled, his many tentacles unmoving. At last, the chief adjudicator spoke. "The 3 trials have been successfully completed. By the authority of the first laws of crossing, all charges are dismissed. The contract between Nicholas Wellington and Riley Tamar is validated under ancient precedent." The containment field surrounding Riley dropped instantly. She rushed to Nick, closing the distance in seconds. When their hands met, the bioluminescence flared between them, a radiant display of their undeniable connection. The crowd gasped, recognizing the undeniable proof of their compatibility. "You fought the entire legal system for me," Riley whispered, her voice tinged with awe. Nick chuckled, his grin infectious. "Technically, I just exploited loopholes in your bureaucracy. But hey, I'm starting to think that skill's actually pretty useful." Inspector Tra approached, his previously imposing form now diminished. "The ruling is registered," he said with reluctance, his voice more subdued than usual. "Your union is beyond my jurisdiction." His holographic interface flickered with what could almost be considered respect. "I have never seen the first laws invoked successfully. Perhaps there is wisdom in the ancient ways I've overlooked." A week later, Nick and Riley stood once more at the intersection where they first met. This time it was Riley who extended her hand to him, a teasing glint in her eyes. "Ready for another transition?" she asked, her tone playful. Nick took her hand, feeling that familiar electric connection between them. "As long as it doesn't involve challenging any more squid-like judges to chess matches." Above them, the public notification board flickered with a simple message: "Contract recognized. Family." Together they crossed the threshold, the endless pulse of Trix 9's city continuing around them. But for Nick, the universe had stopped spinning. He had found his place in the most unlikely of ways, alongside a green-skinned alien who had once warned him he'd die in 12 seconds. As they reached the other side, Nick glanced back at the place where his life had irrevocably changed. I should probably call my boss back on Earth, he mused. Tell them I'm extending my vacation indefinitely. Riley's laugh bubbled up beside him. Tell them you got caught in some unavoidable alien bureaucracy. Not a lie, Nick agreed, and together they walked on, hand in hand, into the heart of the city that had become their home.